allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mayor Follendorf,
Here.
Vice Mayor Olivera,
Here.
Councilmember Herman,
Here.
Councilmember Matilde,
Here.
Councilmember Brolio is absent, but we have a quorum.
Okay. Next is approval of the agenda. Is there any comment by the council on the agenda? Nope. Is there any public comment? Okay, I'll bring it back for approval or a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
401. Public comment. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda. It does not prohibit the city council from acting upon matters not listed. Is there any public comment? Nope, okay. Moving on. Item 4, report out of closed session from 3/19/2019. Let you,
Yep, so,
Yep.
Mayor and Council, the performance evaluation for the city administrator was completed last meeting, and the city administrator received a satisfactory or above review.
thank you. Next on the agenda is report out of closed session from earlier tonight. We will be continuing into closed session after the regular scheduled agenda. So at this time, there is no report. On to item 6, consent agenda. There are 2 items on the consent agenda. Item A, approval of the minutes from March 19th, 2019, and item B, adoption resolution 1904, approving closure of State Route 49 on May 16th for the Calaveras County Annual Youth Parade. Is there any council comment on the consent?
None here.
Is there any public comment? Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move approval. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
On to our regular agenda. Item 7A, approval of the finance officer's recommendation, reserve principles. Emily.
And I have a couple extra copies too, if anyone would. Okay. So I will begin. So this is a presentation. I'm going to be talking about our general fund reserves, what we currently have, and what I propose that we establish. This came out of the Citygate report. A lot of these recommendations are from them, and so a lot of them are just good, generally best practices for government agencies to follow. So we're going to start with what we currently have in the bank for our general fund. So this is as of our most recent audit at 6/30/2018. Total reserves, 1.5 million, but that's not all unrestricted as we've talked about. We have the retiree health trust of 35,000, an OPEB reserve of 148,000. Our general plan reserve is 24,000. And we have a road relinquishment fund of 265. That is leaving $1,094,030 in our unrestricted. So I'm going to be talking about how we should restrict some of those funds into some reserves next. That's the second part. We need to talk about our cash flow. So this isn't something that's unique to us. It's most government agencies have pretty negative cash flow for most of the year because you rely on property tax for most of your general fund revenues. So if you see that right there, 0, you see the little blue line, it's kind of faint, but you can kind of see it dips down to about there. That's about $500,000 negative for our cash flow. And then those 2 bumps right there, those are our 2 property tax allocations. So that's when we really start to even out and see our general fund even out. And so with this in mind, we do need to have a good unrestricted portion for maintaining an adequate amount of cash flow. So then that's when we're going to talk about. So these are what I'm recommending for our reserves. This is our total $2 million that I think we should work towards to build, and $1 million of that being unrestricted for our cash flow purposes, to keep us always positive and not having to borrow from other funds, essentially. And so we talked about that's just to establish our adequate cash flow. So now these are some reserves that I'm recommending we establish. The first 3 I'm going to talk about is the emergency reserve, the exposure reserve, and the economic uncertainty reserve. The emergency reserve would be about 10% of operations, or roughly $400,000. The economic uncertainty reserve would be 5%, or $200,000. And the exposures reserve would also be 5%, or roughly $200,000. So it looks small there, but we're going to zoom in and look at those more closely. So we're going to start off with this economic uncertainty reserve. So we're recommending that this is 5% of our total operations. And so what this is, it's basically maintained to help us with major economic uncertainties. So this would be unforeseen changes in revenues or expenditures, and it's to ensure a stable and efficient delivery of city services and facility maintenance. And this could also help protect us from some recession, aid us in recession planning, which we've gotten some earliest projections from our sales tax revenue consultant as early as 2020, 2021. That's the earliest that they're projecting it out. So it's always good to be prepared for that. The next reserve I want to talk about is our exposures reserve. I'm also recommending 5% of our operations. And so this is maintained for costs that aren't covered by insurance, such as our insurance deductible and other expenses that aren't going to be covered by insurance. So one really good example that we had this year, we had our flood. Some of that was covered by insurance. We still had a $25,000 deductible, and then we also had additional costs that weren't covered under insurance. And so this reserve would be there for that.
Would this also be, like with the museum and the tree?
It could be for any damages, like,
Okay.
Exactly. Okay, the next one is an emergency reserves of 10%. And so this one is for any unforeseen events that's not covered in the other 2 items. So it's a little bit bigger because it doesn't have as much restriction. So the other 2 are pretty outlined as to what you can use them for. This one is anything that's not covered in those, and can be used for natural disasters that are going to be pretty devastating to a small town like us. All right, so then the next reserves we're going to talk about, these last 3 little guys at the bottom. I have to point to my computer screen, sorry. Okay. All right, so we have the internal service fund, capital project fund, and then the accounting designations and legal reserve. So the internal service reserve would be about 2% of operations, or $80,000. And the accounting designations and legal reserve would also be 2% of operations, or approximately $80,000. And our capital projects reserve of 1%, or approximately $40,000. And so looking in more closely to what each of those entail, the internal service fund, this could be used for any costs that are subject to large fluctuations. So when we get into situations where we need more legal assistance or code enforcement, or as our unfunded liability payments fluctuate more, this would help stabilize. The next one we're going to talk about is the accounting designations and legal reserve. This one is for contractual obligations and encumbrances that carry over from year to year. So it would be a cushion to account for those items. If they're not expended in one year, we still have the money for the next year. And then the capital project reserve, these would be for capital projects that would be in the best long-term interest of the city. So that would be determined by our long strategic goals and long-range planning for our capital projects. So, we're going to look at the big picture again. Here's all of our reserves that I recommend. We currently have, so if we establish those reserves we just talked about, that would put our current unrestricted reserves at $94,030. So that's taking out all those other amounts. And so we would have $905,000 to build up, and I recommend that we plan on doing that over the next 3 or so years. And I'm implementing it in the budget process, or I plan on doing that in the budget process. So we have a certain amount set aside for building up our unrestricted reserves. So hopefully at the end of 3 years, we're going to see a $2 million reserve balance.
Sounds like a good plan.
So this is going to be folded into the planning for 1920, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be scalable, meaning there's lots of things adding up, and if 300 grand a year isn't going to work, 250 or 2, but it's in the planning, it's in the business model to dedicate those funds in the process.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Yeah,
So
I
it'll be
think
scalable.
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So we should definitely strive to get it done in 3 years. We do have a lot of projects coming up planned to spend down our cash balance just for the citywide, and so it's a good idea as those balances are being spent down to offset that and build up at the same time so that we are able to still cash flow operations.
Okay, and then what's not mentioned anywhere in here is the unfunded liability for CalPERS. So I'm wondering, does that fit into this equation anywhere? Or
So that was actually mentioned. That would be a part of the internal service fund reserve. So that would be the costs that are subject to large fluctuations, such as the unfunded liability payment.
So
it's not, this isn't establishing like an asset to offset our unfunded liability. That would be a different discussion, but if that is something that you want to look into.
well, what I think I heard from the auditor last meeting was that while that's a big number and it's scary and it's not understood really when it might come due, but there also might be, given interest rates available on the market, there might be a way to attack that and be proactive about it on a less expensive, at least in a less expensive way. So how that fits into the budget with respect to reserves and all that, I think we ought to consider it somehow.
We can look into that. I think Emily and I have talked a little bit about that, and
Yeah, and I
followed
was-
up on the auditor's recommendation. It's not built into this model right now, but Emily was looking at bringing to you the potential for some software that would kind of analyze those costs long-term and increase labor costs long-term, so that we could decide if making cash lump payments to CalPERS is in our interest, or potentially refinancing is in our interest. And then I think Emily and I will need to do a little bit of research, and I'm hoping that we could prioritize it after budget on what other local jurisdictions of our size are doing with their unfunded liability.
Do you know, with respect to that liability, that's assigned to us based on our employee base and our long-term liabilities. If we solved our problem with a loan, CalPERS could still go belly up anyway, right?
Yes.
And where would we be then with respect to our employee base, having paid off our individual liability? And where would our employees be?
I don't know. That I'd have to
I
look
mean, see, where I'm coming from is there's risk in
paying early.
paying early, too. So I think if not in this, excellent work, by the way, very understandable, straightforward, I appreciate it, Emily, really nice. If not in this, though, then we need to get after that and get some answers to it.
Definitely. So, I mean, I've been looking into the software that it's offering pension and, like Melissa said, pension, OPEB, and labor costing. So you can really, it's a simpler tool than what I've been doing for labor costing, and you can really plan out 5-10 years, and you can use it to make all these decisions that we're looking at right now, especially with our unfunded liability. So the pension module, we can see exactly what the effect would be. Say we chose the 15-year payoff versus the 30-year payoff.
Yeah.
Or what that does. So this model that I presented just assumes the same payment schedule, just the minimum payments required.
That's not going to create, that doesn't prevent our liability from becoming greater. It just keeps us current with what we owe in the here and now, right?
Yeah.
Correct. It also depends on every time, you can model it, but it's based off of the modeling at the time.
Yeah.
Like, so for instance, when Calaveras changes its formulary,
Their discount rate or whatever, yeah.
they start restricting what kind of funds that they're investing in, and the funds tend to have less return
Yeah.
on them, then that's going to wind up changing the model. And so what's happening right now is a lot of people have made assumptions, and then it turns out that those assumptions were wrong because CalPERS hasn't performed up to the level it was supposed to.
And then I think internally for Emily and I, we've had two different opinions on this. So we've had one opinion that says we need to be kind of proactive and find ways to kind of pay down or potentially refinance, and then we have another opinion from another CPA and auditor and finance person that said, pay as you go. What you're doing is the best that you could do right now. So I think for Emily and I, we still have a little bit more research, I think, to do.
Yeah.
And to bring back more of an informed discussion on the issue.
Because with the argument of the second opinion that we received, it was that we aren't flush with cash. We're still trying to build up our savings account here. Once we have this saved up, then I think, and we have a strong budgeting practice, I think that's the time to really tackle that and talk about, so now we have extra money, now let's use it and pay this off sooner, so we do have less interest in the long run. But I feel like right now we need to get on solid ground and get on, get our cash flow good, get our budgeting practice sound, so we're not deficit spending, and we actually are long-range planning for this stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good.
Any other questions?
I have one question, and it may not be relevant to this structure you built, but where do we pull in the relinquishment from the bridge, the money from the bridge? Where does that pull into this, or is that a separate reserve that we're looking, the road fund?
Oh, so that's not even part of this.
Okay, so that's gonna be
That's
separate.
completely, so if you want to
Okay.
go back to, we came a long way, guys. Okay, so we go back to my first guy. If only I did less slides. So I'm just talking about this unrestricted portion. We're
Okay.
leaving all these other parts alone. They're staying how
And
they're
that's where
supposed to be.
okay, I missed that pie. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
It's an
I
important
just-
pie. I thought about making an actual pizza for a while, or pie.
All right,
Thank you.
Yes.
You did a great job.
Yes, very
yeah,
good.
very well done,
Excellent.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And I appreciate Emily's willingness to kind of get out there and make recommendations. I think she's doing a great job, and I think her recommendations are really sound, so thank you.
Next on the agenda is item 7B, presentation by the chief on a voluntary...
Amanda?
What?
I think on 7A that we're probably looking for a motion to approve her recommended reserve principles.
Okay,
last
do we
one.
need a motion? Or is that...
Well, we agendized approval of her recommendations for reserve principles.
Okay.
We've identified them as principles rather than your policies, and as Joe mentioned, it's our goal to set those targets. We would bring them forward to you each year in budget, and then the council would have ultimately the authority to decide if they want to increase our budget capacity or increase our reserve capacity. So we would still like approval for the principles.
Okay, so for the principals, is there a motion to approve item A?
I make a motion to approve the reserve principles as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry.
And one more thing, I'm sorry. Can we give the public an opportunity to address
Is it
that?
public comment?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Is there, so just ask if there's any member of the public who want to talk on
Yes.
7A, sorry, I should have come.
No? Okay.
Seeing none?
No. Okay. Okay, back to you.
All right, good evening, council. So in an attempt to seek some assistance from our community and some of the crime issues that we occasionally see here and the spikes that we have, we'd like to put together it's basically a surveillance camera system from the community. So we're just asking for the community to possibly and voluntarily supply, if they're a business, that they have cameras, that they're accessible to us upon request, and we'll keep record of all the addresses and locations. So if we have a crime in town, we know we can go straight to a database that says, these are the locations where we know we have cameras for sure, and it might direct us directly to a business where we can follow up on that investigation immediately. As, primarily solo officers, it's just a tool for us to help us do our job a little bit more quickly. It's difficult to spend the time driving around looking at businesses and residences sometimes to try to figure out who does, who doesn't, who's cooperative and would be willing to give us the information, and who's not. So we're are planning on putting out basically a flyer with kind of like a registration form that has, the name, the address, number of cameras they have, and the locations of those cameras in a file at the police department, confidential file at the police department, so that should we have a major crime or even a minor crime of a theft or anything, we can go to those locations quickly and say, hey, do you have surveillance from this time to this time? Can you pull it for me? We're not asking to access their computer systems. We're not asking to access ourselves to have access to that stuff. We just want to know who's got it and that will help us potentially solve crimes a little more quickly. So we've put together basically a press release. We have a registration form that we've put together that we'd like to get out to the public as soon as possible. I met last month and I will next month with ACBA and put the information out to them so that they know that we have this available, and if businesses would like to register their camera systems with the police department, we just have them fill out that application or that registration form and submit it back to the police department. It's part of the beginning of some also to start help building some of our community outreach. Obviously, the state of the police department's been, it's been a whirlwind. The light at the end of the tunnel is getting a little bit brighter now that we're starting to get some staffing. I've got more plans here in the next couple months for some community outreach stuff that we want to start doing once I can help have some of divvy up some of those duties to the officers. But this is just a small piece that I think will help us and also let the community know that, hey, we want your help. We need your help solving crimes, and if you'd register this stuff with us, it would be a great benefit to the police department. Any questions or comments?
What was the initial reaction from ACBA?
I haven't spoken with them yet.
Oh,
I attended last month. I meant to go this morning, but I had something happen that I had to go deal with. So I didn't get in there until well after they were gone. So we'll see. And like I said, the biggest thing is that so people understand this is voluntary. You don't have to. If you decide at some point, or you move, or you want to pull your information from the police department, we'll delete it, we'll shred their registration and get rid of it. I mean, we're just asking for help.
There's some models for this elsewhere that you've seen work pretty well?
Yeah, I know just my history with Turlock. I know Turlock has a big program in the city of Turlock where they ask the same thing, citizens and businesses to register their camera systems with the police department. I haven't gotten in the mud to find out exactly their details on everything, but I do know that they advertise and have the program available to the public.
Well, I think it's a great idea. And I think that it's, in regards to the community outreach that you spoke of, it's, my opinion is it'll be well received, and I think it's a good step in, getting our police force and our community working hand in hand, and seeing that, we're all here for one reason and not, there can be butting of heads.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the last few years, the climate has not been in favor of law enforcement. So
Sure.
I like this idea. I know I can think of several people that have private security at their homes that would be, probably jump at this opportunity and hope that the businesses really join forces with you.
And that's where I'm hoping to get the most help from, because they're going to be able to get the word out the best, assuming I can gain their support at the onset, to have them all fill out the paperwork, all the ones that do have cameras at their businesses.
Yeah. So thank you. Good idea. And I hope that you get a lot of registrations.
I think it's a good idea also. I think the surveillance cameras, I know when we had a lot of problems, 6 months, a year ago, we had problems, and everyone was trying to guess who was the person who was going in and breaking into Nellie Lou's and so on. And I remember there's this one young man who was homeless, and everyone's going, is it him, is it him? I mean, I think on the camera, it was a lot of confusion because we didn't have the surveillance that we needed.
Yeah.
And I think it could be really helpful.
Well, and so I speak firsthand. I mean, surveillance, you can have a case or you can not have a case based on surveillance. I mean, that's, and honestly, a lot of at least the small time theft stuff are the same people around here. We know who they are, but catching them doing it is a different beast. I met with Councilman Oliver the other day and shared with him at Greenhorn Creek at camps. They had a guy go in there and steal ice cream and cake fondue or something like that, and they had surveillance cameras, and I positively identified him, knowing who he was once I saw the surveillance. Had we not had that, we wouldn't have been able to identify the guy. So
Cake in his chin.
yeah.
You're a really good criminal. Good criminal. Stealing cake. That's funny.
So just a small
Nice.
example of how well, and
Crazy.
something fairly simple, but it resulted in a report being written and forwarded to the DA for a warrant to be issued for the guy's arrest. It's actually the same guy that tried to steal 5 kegs of beer this morning from Cascabel's.
Oh, really? He's very busy.
Yeah, they were empty, but he thought he was going to go take them to get aluminum, get money for the aluminum.
Yeah. The things I don't think of.
Well, it was pretty funny watching him push a bicycle with 5 kegs of beer attached to it. And then it was even funnier when I followed him from Stockton Road with my lights on behind him as he pushed it back down to Cascabel.
I saw this all unfolding this morning.
It would be interesting to see. Crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So this is, at this point, just informational?
Yeah, this is
We
just
don't need any
letting you guys know, and if you had any
information.
comments, concerns about it, or anything like that, to share that with you before we move completely forward with it.
Is there any public comment?
You need to come up to the microphone.
Go to the mic.
No, just because of my naivete, I was just curious, the shooting of Kennedy back in '63 and stuff, is this registration form say that this can be used in a court of law, or is it just for investigations? I just didn't know. I don't know if that's a silly question or not.
Yeah, the assumption will be that it's for prosecutorial purposes, anybody that supplies it, because if we can't use it for prosecutorial purposes, it's not really helping us too much, because we want to identify and arrest and put people in jail or identify them at least if they're committing crimes out there.
Is there any other public comments or questions? Okay. We done with that? We don't have to vote on it? Nope. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're up again. So next on the agenda is item C, which is approval of the 2019-22 dispatch services between the City of Angels and the County Sheriff's Department in the amount of $171,082.
So I met with the Sheriff's Department administration about a month ago or so. Our contract is expiring June 30th, and per the contract, we needed to meet, I think it was 90 to 120 days before, to start talking about, what we were going to do moving forward. So they worked on not bidding out, but coming up with some different numbers for us. They did sit me down and explained why there was a rate increase. That rate increase is about $24,400 from last year to this year, and that's based on pay increases that dispatchers have received over the last year. And the last year, they received about a 15% pay increase at the Sheriff's Department. So equaling that or dividing that out, it was about $6,100 a quarter, coming out to $24,399.40. This year's line item budget on that was about $146,000, I think. So that $24,000 is the difference to make the $171 for this year. They did not include CPI in that for this year. They didn't add another 3% on top of that $171 for us, and I guess I thank them for that. But that's the number that they provided. That's 3 years, and that $24,000 is one time, and then we go to the 171, and then it's CPI after that for the next 2 years, starting in 2020 and then 2021. And then in 2022, I guess we go back to the negotiating table to see where we're at with the funds at that point and what they're going to propose. So I'm just asking that we adopt this agreement, and obviously it's an extra hit of $25,000 basically to the general fund, but they provide 24/7 service to us, to the police department. And I just want to add to as I saw the numbers, my mouth kind of dropped a little bit, and I'm like, holy cow, this is a lot of money. I started doing some research, and I started doing some, my police officer instincts started coming in and thinking about the Sheriff's Department and what we actually get from them. And it's not just the dispatch service. We're on the same radio frequency as all the deputies. So when Angels PD does something, the deputies know that Angels PD are doing something. So that if something happens in Angels, they know it's happening immediately, and they're responding to assist us if needed. Same with us, vice versa. If they have something happen in Copper or Murphy, something major, we've heard it on the radio. It doesn't take 3 phone calls to different people to try to get that information, whereas if we were dispatched on our own, we wouldn't know what they were doing, and they wouldn't know what we were doing. So there's an officer safety benefit to the having that, being on that same radio frequency, and then because we do work with them pretty closely, the deputies, in assisting each other. I think that's pretty much it. I did do a small comparison with an agency down in the valley that's kind of just recently going to the same thing, and their cost, it was a mid-size agency is going to dispatch to a smaller agency, maybe a couple officers bigger than us, and they're about $20,000 more than what Calaveras is charging us for their fees.
Do they dispatch for anyone else?
Calaveras?
The sheriff's office?
No. They do fire. No, they don't do fire. They do medical maybe only, but they don't dispatch for anybody else.
Do they charge the ambulance company for that too?
I don't know.
But
I don't know.
You did look at comps someplace else,
I
at least
did.
one place.
I did.
Can you describe that dispatch? Is it 2 people 24/7? Is it got peaks and valleys, and
It's
they
at
staff
least
it that way?
it's at least 2 people 24/7. I think their minimum staffing is 2. Sometimes it's 3. Since they've got that new building, they've got a big room. They've got plans. When I was over there, I met with one of the lieutenants, and he kind of gave me a tour, and they've got plans for growth. They've got additional workstations in there that aren't being used that they want to try to get staffed. I think there's 10 dispatchers over there now, and they're supposed to be at 12, so they're still short a couple. But yeah, there's at least, I think probably on nights, there's probably 2, and during the day, there's 3, just because there's more call volume during the day. And I'll say even when I was in Turlock, I mean, at most, there was three dispatchers working for that city. So that's pretty much the norm. And I even went as far as to research our call volume and numbers and, you know, how many calls they're actually dispatching us to. I probably have those numbers at the office, but, you know, it was 4,000 calls or something like that they fielded in a year, I would guess, somewhere around there.
Just for my general fund of knowledge, if you're on a cell phone and you dial 911, where's that ring?
Up here?
Not necessarily the sheriff's office.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know if it does that up here or not. Down in the valley, they all have it, they've all got a system now where it's transferred to the local police department. So if you're in Turlock, it goes to Turlock Dispatch. If you're in Modesto, it goes to the Modesto Dispatch. It doesn't go to just CHP. If you're on the freeway, it'll probably go to CHP. Up here, I would have to ask the sheriff's office to find that out. But I know most agencies, I think these days have, with the updating of systems and technology, have gone to a system that those 911 calls come directly into the dispatch center versus being passed through CHP.
So that said, CHP's got no direct link to what you're doing.
No.
So it's a phone call if you want help from them?
Yeah, yeah. They may monitor our channel. They may even have it on their radios in their cars, I don't know. But yeah, they're normally a phone call to their dispatch center, and then their dispatch center has to dispatch a CHP officer. The sheriff's department does it a lot because they don't handle traffic collisions, they don't handle DUIs. If they get one of those, dispatch will have to call, I think their dispatch center might be in Stockton or something, have to call them, and then they have to call the CHP officer on the radio to get them to respond.
Yes, that's true, because I've had to do that with drunk drivers.
Yeah.
And it's a pain.
Okay.
So I have a feeling that if you call 911, well, we can all try it right now. I have a feeling that I think if you're in the county, it probably goes to Calaveras Dispatch, but I would have to look to confirm that.
So you've done all the research and you don't like it, but that's the number.
Yeah, that's the number. I mean, and obviously having our own dispatch service, the number would be 3 times that to even consider that for ourselves, and that's not reasonable. And although I don't like the number, I think it's not unreasonable based on what I've done, what I've looked into.
Okay.
Okay, any other council questions? Is there any public comment? No? Okay, bring it back to council for approval.
I'll move.
Good. You got it.
Okay, so moved by Veronica, second by Joe.
Can we do public?
Yeah, I just did.
Yeah, we did.
Now I lost where I was at. Oh, I'm bringing it back to, there's a first and there's a second, all in favor?
All
Aye.
right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I missed who moved and who seconded.
Veronica moved and I seconded.
Thank you.
Okay. On to item D, approval of amendment number 1 to a grazing agreement between the City of Angels and Michael and Tony Ann Fisher to include a one-time 1-year extension and an increased fee of $500 per year for the additional year of the agreement for a total amount of $4,500. Melissa.
Perfect. I would like to recommend the extension for an additional year to the agreement that we have. The Fishers have had a 5-year lease with the City of Angels Camp. We recently became aware of the expiration of the lease, and given the constraints on staff in terms of our capacity to get out a bid solicitation in the appropriate amount of time, and also the constraints that puts on our leasee in terms of relocating the animals that are out there and finding alternative property, we recommend that it's in everyone's best interest that we extend this lease for an additional year. And then I would like to begin the bid solicitation earlier so that in the event that the Fishers do not propose to renew the lease again for another 5 years, or they do not, or are not selected as the bidder, that we afford adequate time for them to find an alternative for their animals. So with that, I recommend this extension. As city staff, we have no concerns with the terms of the existing lease or the conditions of the property at this time. So I'm happy to entertain any questions that you might have about this.
And legal looked over it more.
Given the cost of the agreement, I did not solicit
I did.
legal. It was
And that's fine.
$4,500, so I rolled the dice and thought
That's fine.
I could
just
get it
was-
wrong.
That's fine. Is there any council questions before I turn it over to Michael and Tony Ann?
Nope.
Do you guys have any questions
No
or
questions.
anything that, okay? Is there any public comment? Nope. Okey-doke. Back to council for a motion.
I'll move.
Everybody's moving.
Okay, now who is that?
Jinx.
Whose turn was it?
Who's taking it?
Linda, go for it.
My turn.
Okay, Linda, and then second by-
I'll second.
You good? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, item 7E, update on event application from the Angels Camp Business Association, spring sidewalk sale, special event on April 20th.
Perfect. So we just wanted to make the council aware of the event application that we have received. As you are aware, with Farmers Market, we have an agreement that came to you for approval, so you're aware of that special event that's ongoing beginning in May. We also had tonight the parade, the youth parade for the Calaveras County Fair. And this one does not require, the sidewalk sale does not require council approval in terms of an agreement or an encroachment permit, but nonetheless, we thought it was important to make you aware of this event that's happening. And it will be April 20th. They have had their applicant meeting with both police, fire, and public works. And they've kind of reviewed the expectations of both departments, and they've submitted their insurance accordingly. So we look forward to this sidewalk sale. It looks like it's a go. So I'm happy to answer any questions. This is part of a new process that we implemented with organizations that are hosting special events so that we could coordinate them better on behalf of the city. And hopefully it's going to go well this year, and I'll keep you posted how that application process is going.
And then there's these postcards up here, if anyone wants to take one. So,
It's very kid-friendly this year, and there's a list of events on the back of the card.
Is that the day before Easter?
Yes, it's Saturday before Easter downtown. Besides the shopping, of course, that's available, I think that there's a lot of kid events which span from one end of historic downtown to the other, which is nice.
it looks like there's an Easter hat contest, Easter egg grab.
And notice the prize is $50 for the best hat for the adults and $25 for the kids' best hat. So wear your hats, guys. Decorate them and come down. And then there's going to be an egg grab with the golden eggs of special prices for the kids, too. This will be fun.
And the Easter bunny.
And the Easter, well, we're
Photo.
working on that.
Yeah.
I lost my Easter bunny person today. So I had somebody all lined up to get in the little bunny suit. And he said, I'm sorry, I have to go someplace, so try again. If anyone wants to be a bunny, let me know.
Okay, and there's no motion on that, we can, just information, right?
Just information.
Okay, on to council reports, and I will start to my left with Councilmember Matodi.
Went to the DAC meeting. It was going to be at the fairgrounds, and then it was back at the DAC building. And it was an ethics class which is informative. I've already done mine, but I still attended this, and there were lots of good questions that came up. I thought, instead of just having an actual class with more of a attending and very little questions, this was very interactive. Again, the sidewalk sale, want to encourage everybody the Saturday before Easter. And then, of course, looking forward to Farmers Market coming up in May, and of course, the frog jump. And I think that a lot of good things are happening in our town. We have a few businesses opening up, which are going to be a lot of fun.
Go ahead. Sorry. I'll take my turn. Okay, one thing I was going to say about the sidewalk sale is that Veronica and I are just volunteers. This is not a city council event, we're not promoting this from the city council. We're just raised our hand and said we would help. I went to some of the museum, two of the meetings actually, ad hoc and commission, and we're just kind of working, there's a good group, they're really putting our heads together. The museum itself is trying to find ways to bring more operation, monies in, revenues in, and looking for the structure that will help to bring that about. So it's kind of vague, but that's where we're at right now. And there are events, I think Night at the Museum, something kind of cute like that theme, and some other events that would help to bring more revenue in. So that's kind of where we're at there.
Councilmember Olivera?
LAFCO, nothing to report. Next, they don't meet again until May 20th. CPPA, Calaveras Public Power, as you see, they meet on April 17th, so there's nothing to report there. Central Sierra doesn't meet until the 16th of May. Utica Power, Water and Power, the search continues for a general manager. From our meeting on the 26th, we had activity there. On the 29th, Karen, who is in our audience tonight, did a great job of hosting a Highway 4 corridor meeting of key folks, all the organizations there, and some good positive outcome, and looking for more results in that area. UWPA meets again on the 23rd, and then the Solid Waste Task Force, my application's been accepted. I've been told over the phone that there are now 6 of 8 appointees, which constitutes a quorum, and that any day soon there might be a meeting. So, there you go.
I want to let the council know on April 24th is Legislative Action Day. I think that's the right day. So for those of you that don't know what that is, it's a time where all city elected go to Sacramento, and we have scheduled meetings with our legislators, both within the Senate and the Assembly, and then there's also a huge forum that meet in the morning and in the afternoon. A couple years ago, the governor showed up. We go over hot topics in the legislation and other presentations. So if you're interested, there's a deadline, and the application to register is on the League of Cities website. I also attended UWPA, nothing other than what Joe has said, and then I also became aware of a grant opportunity with the Fire Safe Council. They're opening up next year's grant application, so I don't know if that's something that we can look into in terms of fuel reductions or other prevention, and maybe this year get ahead of the curve to possibly apply for an opportunity there with the fire department. And that is all I have to report. And on to calendar. Susan.
Okay, tomorrow, Wednesday, the 3rd of April at 5:30, there's a COG meeting at the Board of Supervisors chambers, and after that, Calaveras Transit Authority meets. On April 11th at 6 p.m., Planning Commission meets here at the Firehouse, and then we meet back here
for city council on the 16th of April.
And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
We're going to return to closed session?
Yes. Adjourn regular and go into closed session. So we will give enough time for everyone to leave the building and then video to clean up or stop? What do we? Stop?
It takes hours, I think, to clean up. It takes them a while to clean up. Maybe an hour.
45 minutes.
So we move to a different room?
Do we have that option available to us?
Maybe if we kick them out and then move in here. And then they can go to.
I actually don't think we'll be that long, so if it's, maybe you wouldn't mind stepping out for like maybe 15 minutes?
Are you sure?
Yeah.
And
You know better than you.
I don't know, that's why I'm like asking,
yeah.
do you
Let's-
think we
let's-
can do it in 15?
Let's do that.
Doug, can
Okay.
we have him
Okay.
videotape the report out afterwards? So we
Yeah.
can get it all into the same?
I mean, if he's not there, turn it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just need
You
to
think
turn
we
on
can
the audio
finish?
and everything.
I'll turn it.
Thank you, everyone.
Get your wisdom.
Okay, good job, Em. Nice.
Yeah, we're done with open.
Yeah,
We got a report out of closed session, but that's
Okay.
it.
Thank you.
Hand them, you can give them to people too. You're more than welcome, we have a lot of them, so